name of a landscape concept that originated around 1981 in the state of Colorado. Now, since that time, the xeriscape concept has really become very popular and grown to well over 40 states. Now, the term xeriscape and the logo are trademarked by the National Xeriscape Council, incorporated out of Georgia, which also coordinates their educational programming efforts. Now, if you're asking what is xeriscape, well, actually xeriscape is a concept of quality landscaping that conserves water and protects the environment at the same time. Now, the term xeriscape actually comes from a Greek word, xeros, which means dry, and that's really where the misconceptions fall in place. And I want to clarify some things right off the bat as far as what xeriscape is really not considered. First of all, it's not just for the southwestern part of the United States where it's very dry. Again, if you'll remember, 40 states have initiated various programs, and it's also very adaptable to Oklahoma. It's not vast seas of gravel, concrete, and cacti, which a lot of people have stereotyped in their mind, and it's not all dry and dusty. Again, it can be a landscape that is very lush and green. And another big problem is that people refer to it as xeriscape, which really turns people off and implies another negative. And remember, it's called xeriscape. Now let's look at the fundamentals or principles, and there's 7 of them. And the first one is actually planning and design, which is very basic. And what you need to take into consideration are the climatic conditions for your area, such as rainfall and temperature, any existing vegetation, and be sure and do a site survey to know where you might have any type of underground cables or overhead wires. And it's real important to know how you're going to use your landscape as far as use areas, where you might have children playing, where you want to garden, and various things of that nature. And like most of us here in Oklahoma, we try to do things probably in phases in a landscape just to make it a little bit more cost effective, and that also applies in the xeriscape principles. Now, the second fundamental is soil analysis. Again, very basic, and that means that you take a soil test to find out what nutrients you might have deficient and what your pH is in your soil. But there's a little bit more to it. You want to find out your soil type, in addition to the percolation or drainage of your soil. Does it hold water in particular areas, or is it very sandy and drain rapidly? And then when we talk about soil analysis, we're also talking about soil amending. And if you'll remember, the basic rules are that if you're just digging one hole to plant trees or shrubs in, just put back the normal or original soil. Now, if you're working up an entire bed, then it's a good thing to go ahead, especially in annuals or vegetables, and incorporate any kind of amendment that would add organic matter. Step number 3 is appropriate plant selection, and this is where people get into trouble too. You want to make sure you put the plant in the right place. So the plant has to be in its location or acclimated environment. That means also that when you put the plant in, you want to make sure you space it as if it was fully mature. And then there are some plants that are going to be higher water users versus others. So the ones that are higher water users, try to acclimate them together and put them a little bit closer to the house where you have more access to your water system. And then put the ones that are more drought tolerant further away from the house, and this is called oasis planting. And there's a lot of interest in planting natives, and we really would encourage people to consider it, but natives are not no maintenance, and they're not the answer to all problems. You still have to make sure that the native plants are put in the right location, whether they like shade, moisture, full sun, etc. Now, the 4th principle is practical turf areas. And remember that turf does have its purpose, but catch the word there, practical. What it's saying is, in high traffic areas, high use areas, put in the turf, which is very tolerable to those conditions. But remember, there are also areas where turf doesn't need to be installed, and coexistence with trees is one of those examples. Turf and trees, especially the shaded areas under trees, they just don't go well together, so you need to design your landscape accordingly. The 5th principle is efficient irrigation, with the emphasis on water when needed, water less often but deeper, and the special times to water again are encouraged in early morning or during the night. If you should install an irrigation system, you want to make sure that you do it with different zones according to your plant material, and use efficient systems such as drip, spaghetti, bubblers, microsprays, and rotor heads, just to mention a few. And most people will put in an irrigation system, especially in a new landscape situation, but in Oklahoma they're often used for our drought periods. The sixth principle is use of mulches, one that we talk about often, to retain moisture, moderate soil temperatures, aid in weed control, and then especially in erosion. Now when you apply a mulch, you want to remember that it needs to be reapplied on an annual or biannual basis, that you want to watch your thickness, that you don't get it too thick, and avoid contact with any trunk or stem tissue. The last principle is appropriate maintenance, and again it's just common sense, where you do a little bit of work with pruning, fertilizing, and pest management. And remember, xeriscape again is a lower maintenance objective, but you still have to be out and actively participate in your landscape. Now you'll notice that many of these principles are everyday events and really aren't new, but I think that the xeriscape concept really just combines the steps in an educational and marketable way. Now let me give you a few examples of some landscape xeriscape designs. You might remember recently we visited with Kathy White in Oklahoma City, and she had an interesting area on the side of her home, which is very common to many of us. It was very narrow with a sidewalk and heavily shaded. So instead of trying to grow grass along that location, she put in some ground cover and rocks, which really were more acclimated to that particular condition. Now I'd like to take you along and we'll see a few more examples across Stillwater. I'm at the home of Mr. Bill Cunningham in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and I would say that Bill probably has your typical 3-bedroom home with a pretty average size lawn for most cases. But one thing I want you to notice is that he's really done some great xeriscape design work. And I don't think Bill really intended for it to be considered that way, other than Bill wanted low maintenance, not as much lawn to mow, and some plant material that would give him some color, pretty much seasonal. And if you'll notice in the very front of the yard, the traditional home, it seems like, usually comes out maybe a foot, 2 feet from the foundation, crams up a few plants right up against it, and that really is the basis of their landscape. If you'll notice here, there's some great curving patterns, which is really a good concept in design, and these made huge planting beds that go right along each side of his front yard. So he's probably reduced his turf area maybe 50%. So obviously it's less time in mowing, but it's also really going to give him some nice transition in color, and it just does a remarkable job of improving probably the value of his home just in landscaping alone. He's used some low water usage plants such as Yaupon holly, barberry. He's put a lot of perennials in to give him color such as coreopsis and yarrow and liatris. So he has nice seasonal transitions throughout the year. And of course he's used edging and filled in with some mulch that we talked about, and he put a weed barrier under the mulch to try to help out a little bit in some of the weed problems that might encroach on him. But again, notice the design and the shape. He has some other beds along the side and the front, and he's also made sure that where his large shade trees are, where grass is going to be a problem as far as getting any kind of a stand or a thick stand, he's made sure that his beds go wide enough to cover that area up where he can put in plant material that will take that type of shade. Now this is a landscape that's only about 1.5 years old, and one thing that Bill mentioned too is, again, a lot of plant material, he's been doing it in phases so it's not so cost prohibitive. So he has a several-year plan of different phases. The front obviously was his first priority, again with different phases. In the backyard, what he's done is he's already gone in and designed his beds with a lot of nice curves and shapes, but again, there's still grass here because he hasn't put in those particular planting beds. So I think this is a great example of really what we're trying to emphasize with xeriscaping. Now, another home that we visited recently in Stillwater is the home of Richard and Dot Dannell. And they live in again, a pretty typical home, I think, but they have a smaller yard. And they too have the priority of reducing that lawn as far as any type of mowing practices. They put in a lot of walkways and design the usage areas along with the deck and a nice waterfalls. But what they've done is put in wood chips instead of using cypress mulch like the previous home, and they've filled in those areas to go ahead and kill out the grass, and then they'll be planting as the design takes shape or as they come in contact with any plant material that they might be wanting to use. So it appears that they'll be using a lot of ground covers. Again, they only have one area that's grassy around some of their trees, which again, probably in the future as they mature will take less precedence. But they have some huge shade trees, again, where they're realizing that the grass just doesn't do that well, so they've put in some planting beds. Now you can see that we've just shown you 3 examples, and there's a lot of ideas that go into the xeriscape concept. Again, I think it's mostly just trying to make sure that you plan and design and match everything up so it can be considered low maintenance, although it's still going to take some work. Now, if you would like to get more information on xeriscaping, a book has just recently come out that's called Xeriscape Gardening, Water Conservation for the American Landscape. Now, it's endorsed by the National Xeriscape Council, and the authors are Ellefson, Stevens, and Welsh, and these are landscape architects from Colorado, people who work in the horticulture industry, and an extension specialist from Texas A&M. So it's one of the best books I've seen that really covers xeriscaping as far as the up-to-date principles, plus it gives listings of plant material that are considered xeriscape plants for various parts of the country, and it also specifically breaks them down into bulbs, perennials, annuals, those types of things. So this book is readily available. It's a great book as a reference, and if you would just like to get some more information on xeriscaping, you can also write to the National Xeriscape Council Incorporated, Post Office Box 767-936, Roswell, Georgia 30076 7936. And hopefully we've given you some ideas about design that maybe during the upcoming winter months you'll have a little bit of time to maybe balance out your landscape to make it more water efficient and lower maintenance.